Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Good talking to you, sir.
It's always a pleasure, Kim. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So you finally got a chance to not only read the Inspector General's report on Fast and Furious, but actually talk to the Inspector General today. What did you think about what he had to say during today's oversight hearing?
Well, I think he presented his case pretty well. I will tell you that I looked at the report and fast read. So there's time that we're going to have to spend, each and every one of us, to go with a fine-tooth comb and go back through it. But there's some inconsistencies, and it doesn't vindicate anybody, but it does tie both operations, both wide receiver and Fast and Furious together. So it's access to information, Cam, as you know, we couldn't get and should be able to get and will be able to get. But this is our first look at it, so we want to make sure we go back through it with a fine-tooth comb.
And I know you mentioned vindicate, and, you know, it didn't take long for Holder to say, hey, you know what, this report vindicated me. But the Inspector General, he wouldn't even touch that issue.
No, and particularly when you go to the matter at hand, the Attorney General said that he reviewed the affidavits for the wiretaps and that nothing in there implicated nor would cause alarm for upper-level Justice Department, obviously is a red flag and, boy, a red herring, because obviously that was something that was perfectly cited.
Absolutely. And, Congressman, to that end, the Attorney General himself, as Jenny said, not only said that he himself was vindicated, but that basically the entire story that he's been saying all along was exactly what was in that Inspector General's report. And, again, we know that that's not true. But you and your colleagues as well, I know, had some questions about the Inspector General's report, how it dealt with Lanny Breuer, for instance. Senator Grassley pointed out yesterday that the Inspector General's report seems to take Lanny Breuer at his word when he said that he never saw the email or the letter to Congress that said that guns weren't walked, when in fact there are emails that show that he did look it over and in fact made notes on this. How concerned are you that we don't have the full story, and we're not going to have the full story because of the way the administration has handled all of this?
No, but I disagree. We will get that story, and we'll have access to that. We have to do our due diligence and make sure that contempt charge at the civil level it prevails, which it will. President Nixon, President Bush tried to avoid that and could not, and this administration will not either. But Lanny Breuer's in trouble, and should be in trouble, and should resign personally, because some of the things that we were bringing up is that he had an integral aspect to understanding this. He sent somebody from his office, the reporter back him, to open up Operation Wide Receiver early on. He Voth actually had a presentation that he did back in March of 2010 here in D.C. He sent Cooley, I think is his name, to that for oversight. So these people have to report. So like I was saying in my testimony, is Lanny Breuer is held to another higher extent, and because it's like a prior's record with a felony, is that you already have a past record, and now the rationale that was utilized in wide receiver, and you still went forward. That's even worse. And
Congressman, you really drove home that point. You talked about how Lanny Breuer sent staff to review wide receiver, and you talked about he knew the outcomes, and he still let it go. And yet you've got Jason Weinstein, who worked for Lanny Breuer. He's gone. But Breuer is still there.
That shows you the incapacitation and inadequacies of the Attorney General at stake, because he is not a person that can manage this. It shows this report shows that there is so much disarray within the DOJ. It's pitiful, yeah. And we need to have some solutions. And I think that even at the end, we had Elijah Cummings, ranking member, even coming and saying, I say that at this point in time, and we got to make sure that there's a reform. I don't want to look back and not have put reforms in here that mean something, because we need to hold people accountable. And I think, Jenny, the rest of America is watching, because, if this were to happen in regular America, somebody's in the jail and the key's thrown away. And it's got to happen to the bureaucrats in this case, too. And we need to rectify the scenario not only for the Terry family, and God love them, but also the Mexican people that lost their lives in Jaime Zapata.
And I also have to, you asked the Inspector General, you said, in discovery, did anyone with the DOJ raise questions about the truthfulness and the possible misleading testimony Holder was giving to your committee. He said he'd have to go back and check. Was that surprising to you? That he couldn't
Yes.
flat out answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that, when people prepare me for my testimony and stuff, we go through the validity and stuff like that, and I want to make sure, because we definitely have a timeline deceitful dialogue that went on that the Attorney General in his testimony saying that he knew about Operation Fast and Furious in a couple weeks before May. And obviously something's wrong here, and particularly also with the letter. There needs to be a checks and balances. So I want them to go back, and I will be submitting a question to review any statement that was made before Congress, who reviewed it, what comments were made, and how were those comments made. Were they plus, minus? Were they fact-checked? And were their alarms sounded?
Congressman, President Obama was asked about Fast and Furious in the Inspector General's report in the interview that he did with Univision earlier today. Matthew Boyle of the Daily Caller reports on the president's comments. He was asked specifically about not releasing documents, and he said, quote, "We've released almost all of them. The ones we don't release typically relate to internal communications that were not related to the actual Fast and Furious operations." He says the challenge that we have is that at any given moment in the federal government, there may be people who do dumb things, and I've seen it, I promise. Ultimately, I'm responsible. My key managers, including the Attorney General, are responsible for holding those people accountable, for me, which is, I guess, seems to be the new definition of the buck stops here, for making sure that they are fired if they do dumb things, and then fixing the system to ensure it doesn't happen again. And I'm very confident that you'll not see any kinds of actions like this in the future, but what I don't like to see is these kinds of issues becoming political circuses or ways to score political points in Congress, partly because it becomes a distraction from us doing the business that we need to do for the American people. What's your reaction to that, Congressman?
Yeah, I'm dumbfounded. I'm sorry, I'm just dumbfounded, because this is Trey Gowdy actually sounded off, and he said it perfectly, because if we don't have the true jurisdiction of justice, blindfolded, giving justice, not knowing who it is, by weighing out the information and all the information and applying justice equally with that sword and quickly, if we don't uphold to that, none of this matters. We're done. And to say that we need to move away from here is another smoke and mirrors. I'm sick of it. This gentleman needs to take accountability of here. And, if he's truthful to his word, why is Lanny Brewer even in the office? Why has he still got a job? Why is he not pending litigation against him?
But also, is it up to the Attorney General to decide whether or not these documents post February 4th relate to the investigation?
Well, and that was some of the questions. Is we want to have that jurisdiction, and how do we settle it? How do we get compliance with our oversight of these agencies, and then reach this stalemate that we got with this Attorney General? This is one of those ones that I've got to tell you, I'm going to be persistent about. I want to make sure that we follow through with every letter of the law at the contempt charges, and that's why I still have no confidence in this Attorney General nor this administration.
And a lot of time was spent on this whole issue of executive privilege. Mm-hmm. And the IG made it very clear that it was unfounded, that it was unnecessary. And, if he goes that far, what's the impact on all of this with the president invoking executive privilege?
Oh, absolutely. There should have been a harsher penalty with this, and I think that's something that we have to come to grips with as Congress is that we also are checks on the executive branch, and this was an egregious act of power. We've got to come to some ramifications and some dictation on that there's a consequence when you imply executive privilege when it's not warranted.
And how about when he talked about how he was refused by the White House to see internal communications?
Once again, we're going to come back to this moment, Jenny, and the civil contempt charges, making sure that we have access to all those documents. But isn't it interesting now? This is once again follows the same kind of protocol that it's dumped on us. Last couple of days of a session where spin has already been placed on it. And then we're not coming back until a lame duck session. And there's very little Congress may have oversight to do prior to this election. We try to not make this about an election. We wanted this about getting to the truth and we're dumbfounded about it. And you know, the thing I also want to bring up, Jenny, is notice the demeanor outside of one gentleman on the other side of the aisle, much different than in prior hearings.
Absolutely. The hostility was not there.
No. You know, some of these facts are hard to dispute. We need to have, more of that, how would I say, come to Jesus understanding about the real facts of the matter.
You know, and he talks about being vindicated, the Attorney General. But the IJ admitted he should have turned over the documents.
Yep.
He shouldn't have stonewalled. And that he shouldn't, go into this whole issue of being vindicated. But that's the headline you got in the media today. Attorney General vindicated. What's your headline coming out of this?
Failure on behalf of this administration and the Attorney General to rein in illicit behavior.
Do you
really? DOJ.
Do you feel like he named 14 people that need to be reviewed for disciplinary action. Do you think you're going to see more accountability, or is the fact that, Jason Weinstein has gone, is that all we're going to see?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think there was enough stink today, particularly with Lanny Brewer. Lanny Brewer, I don't think would be making his pension payments. I wouldn't be making that a bet on the bank. And in all due diligence, that's probably a good call. There's others that need to have the same impunity, involvement in regards to that. And I would expect it. And, a good manager, a good person, a person that oversees people and people skills is also going to relate their inadequacies themselves. And that shows you just the type of character that the Attorney General is. And that's why I've lost faith, and most of America's lost faith, and it's time for him to go.
In fact, again, the folks at Univision grilling President Obama today asked why the Attorney General should not be fired by the president. Now, Congressman, before we let you go, I know that there are a couple of more reports from the House Oversight Committee that we can expect to see. Any idea when those might be made public?
I know that our second part was going to be shortly after this, but I know that we're going to digest this, so I don't know exactly what the time frame will be on that, Cam, but we'll make sure that you get a heads up when it's coming.
All right.
And that'll be the second of three parts. The second part, the last thing that I want to also say to Cam is that, when Brian Terry was killed, and this is the other point that I wanted to make sure we took home, and we're going to get additional answers, and Trey Gowdy also hit on this, is it sends a clear message within the prosecutorial or the Justice Department in regards to what happened. We need to know all the details. Mm-hmm. And this timeline is off. This timeline has been off, and it continues to be off, and we keep kind of fudging the picture. It stated in this report that the Attorney General asked the very next day, he sent 3 emails or an email to 3 different individuals to get answers. Never received them. You think that he would be due diligent about that. The second part about that I also brought up was when the shooting occurred, a high-profile shooting, particularly that of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. It was rumored that they were scared that it was one of the guns that was in this aspect, and it went rampant. And so this had to have come up into that discussion directly with the Secretary of Homeland Security and this Attorney General. Something's wrong here, and this timeline is off.
Well, Congressman, I know that you and Representative Issa and your colleagues on the House Oversight Committee are not going to stop asking questions until you get those answers.
Absolutely. And Cam, Jenny, thank you for keeping this in the forefront. This is a keystone of our Constitution, and thanks for keeping it in mainstream media.
Absolutely.
You got it. Thank you, too.
You're welcome.
Congressman Paul Gosar joining us here tonight on Cam & Company.